What do the world's most powerful technologists know that we don't? That question hovers like smoke over the windswept cliffs of Kauai, over the concrete launch pads of South Texas, and beneath the silent vaults beneath New Zealand soil. Since 2020, a quiet urgency has gripped some of the most influential figures in Silicon Valley, men who built the platforms that define modern life. Now they're building something else: bunkers, colonies, fortresses, a new kind of ark for uncertain times. It started with whispers, a rumored airstrip here, an unusual construction permit there. Then came the satellite images, massive solar arrays in the jungle, strange excavation patterns in the desert, sprawling underground structures beneath luxury compounds. Gradually, the outlines of a different kind of future came into focus, one shaped not by hope, but by retreat. These aren't mere eccentricities. This is strategic withdrawal by men with access to the world's most advanced data models, predictive AI, and, perhaps, classified warnings. Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and others have poured billions into quiet preparations for what they seem to believe is inevitable: societal collapse, ecological breakdown, or a cascade of crises that render normal life impossible. To the public, they speak of innovation, sustainability, exploration. But behind the curtain, their investments tell another story, one of control, isolation, and survival. They are creating private systems for everything civilization provides: food, water, medicine, energy, defense. Some are building literal fortresses on remote islands. Others are launching escape plans into orbit. Together, they are weaving a web of survival that spans Earth, space, and everything in between. This isn't science fiction. It's already happening. And yet, the most unsettling part isn't what they've built. It's the possibility that they're right. This 14-part journey explores the hidden architecture of billionaire survivalism, not with paranoia, but with thoughtful inquiry. What if their actions are based on truths too uncomfortable to share? What if the very technologies that made them powerful are now threatening to unravel the fabric of society? Each chapter will enter the world of a different architect of apocalypse, from Zuckerberg's Hawaiian Redoubt to Musk's Martian Gambit. We'll explore the meaning behind their choices, the timing, the silence, and what it reveals about the fragile threads that hold civilization together. This is not a story of doom. It's a story of mirrors, of how those who understand our systems best are preparing to live without them. Perhaps the question isn't whether they've overreacted. Perhaps the question is, what do they know, and why aren't we listening? It started with a fence, then it became a fortress. On the lush island of Kauai, hidden behind palm-fringed boundaries and security checkpoints, Mark Zuckerberg has built something far beyond a retreat. The 1,400-acre Kula Ranch began as a quiet purchase in paradise. Now it's a self-contained citadel, a place where the future is not simply visited, but survived. Beneath the surface, literally and metaphorically, the transformation is astonishing. Multiple levels of underground infrastructure reach deep into volcanic rock. Steel-reinforced blast doors, radiation shielding, and air filtration systems form a shelter engineered not just to withstand disaster, but to wait it out. Everything from power to water to food functions off-grid. Zuckerberg's bunker isn't alone. It's embedded in a complex system, a closed loop of survival. Hydroponic farms, seed banks, livestock enclosures, and aquaculture tanks operate under the guidance of specialists in sustainable agriculture. Even water, one of the most fragile resources in any crisis, is accounted for, filtered from groundwater and seawater alike. This is no prepper's panic room. It's the infrastructure of a long-term future, planned with clinical precision. Local whispers speak of expanded living quarters, medical clinics, educational spaces, and even server farms, suggesting not just survival, but continuity. A new society, small and self-governed, prepped to endure whatever storm approaches. The timing is what raises the eyebrows. Zuckerberg's most aggressive construction began after 2020, a year marked by political instability, disinformation epidemics, and a global pandemic. As the head of the world's most powerful social network, Zuckerberg had a front-row seat to the unraveling of public discourse. Perhaps more than anyone, he saw how fast the center can fail, how easily societies fracture. His compound reflects that awareness. The airspace above it is restricted. The security teams patrol with military-grade equipment. Entry is tightly controlled, and the silence surrounding its full scope is as thick as the concrete it's built from. Publicly, Zuckerberg speaks of cultural stewardship, sustainability, and philanthropy. But the reality beneath the soil is different, quieter, colder, built for endurance rather than empathy. This raises a haunting question. When the man most intimately familiar with the digital architecture of modern civilization starts preparing for its collapse, what does that say about where we're headed? Perhaps his fortress isn't a failure of faith in humanity, but an indictment of how quickly it can falter. And if that's true, what happens to those left outside the walls? What if salvation isn't underground, but off-world? Elon Musk has never been subtle about his ambitions. Colonizing Mars, he said, isn't science fiction, it's survival. But behind the grand statements and polished presentations lies a darker undercurrent, a vision of escape, not just exploration. SpaceX, Musk's rocket company, has funneled immense resources into its Starship program. These ships aren't luxury cruisers or research vessels. They're built for speed, volume, and resilience, capable of carrying dozens of people on long, harsh journeys. Comfort is secondary. Survival is primary. Former employees whisper that the internal documents don't read like a colonization plan. They read like an evacuation order. The focus is clear: rapid deployment, crisis response, maximum occupancy. Starship isn't a vessel for discovery. It's a lifeboat designed to launch not just astronauts, but the elite, the essential, the chosen. The urgency is real. Since 2020, timelines have accelerated. Projects once planned for decades are now compressed into years. Starbase, SpaceX's sprawling facility in Boca Chica, Texas, is expanding into something more than a launch pad. Residential buildings, closed-loop systems, and emergency logistics hint at dual purpose: a command center for space and a bunker for Earth. The rationale? Catastrophic risk. Whether it's climate collapse, nuclear conflict, or AI gone awry, Musk often speaks of existential threats with a kind of practiced certainty. His solution isn't to fix the system from within, but to leap beyond it. Even his other companies serve this mission. Tesla's solar grids and battery storage make off-grid living feasible. The Boring Company's tunnel tech doubles as a method for building underground shelters. Neuralink, his brain-computer interface, could enable digital control in hostile or isolated environments. Together, these tools sketch a future where continuity doesn't require society. Only technology, sealed systems, and the right people. Critics call it hubris. Others see prophecy. But perhaps the most unsettling detail isn't technical. It's emotional. Musk speaks of leaving Earth not with sorrow, but with pragmatism, as though the loss of our home planet is a data point, not a tragedy. And maybe that's the point. When those who shape our future see Earth as temporary, what does that say about their faith in its survival? Is Mars the next frontier or the final fallback? A winding road cuts through the hills of New Zealand's South Island, leading not to a farmhouse or resort, but to something far more concealed. Peter Thiel, co-founder of PayPal and one of Silicon Valley's most enigmatic figures, has quietly constructed one of the most advanced private survival networks on the planet. Beneath the pastoral beauty of his properties lies a fortress dug deep into the earth, shrouded in legal silence and military-grade engineering. Thiel's vision is different from Musk's cosmic escape or Zuckerberg's island redoubt. It is rooted in strategic patience, a belief not in outrunning collapse, but in outlasting it. Local contractors, bound by secrecy, speak of 6 subterranean levels. Industrial workshops, medical facilities, secure storage for supplies, living quarters designed for months, perhaps years, of total isolation. And above it all, agricultural operations that can feed hundreds without outside help. New Zealand, with its isolation, neutrality, and resource richness, is more than scenic. It's strategic. Thiel didn't just buy land. He obtained citizenship under mysterious circumstances, sidestepping standard procedures. It was not a homecoming. It was a contingency plan. But it goes further. Thiel has constructed a private logistics network, aircraft, fuel caches, shipping routes capable of moving people and supplies to his stronghold rapidly. Intelligence suggests coordination with other tech elites who've also purchased land in the region. A silent alliance prepared to activate at the first sign of global breakdown. Medical professionals, engineers, security personnel, all reportedly identified, vetted, and on call. A community, not of neighbors, but of necessity. Survival curated through privilege. It's easy to dismiss this as paranoia, but Thiel's investments say otherwise. Companies in biotech, energy independence, encrypted communication, all tools for continuity in a fractured world. Not just for him, but for those selected to endure alongside him. What's haunting is the duality, the public persona of a venture capitalist investing in the future, and the private reality of someone building an ark for the end of it. If the best prepared among us believe the system will break, what responsibility do they bear to the rest of us? Is preparation a right or a withdrawal from shared fate? Thiel's bunker poses no threat to society, but it casts a long shadow over its faith in resilience, and it asks the quiet question that echoes through every steel-reinforced corridor: who gets to restart the world? In the silence of low Earth orbit, Jeff Bezos is building a second Earth. Publicly, his space company Blue Origin speaks of ambition, of tourism, of pushing boundaries. But deep within the architecture of its plans lies something different, a sanctuary above the clouds, a place to endure, not just explore. The designs are bold, massive orbital habitats capable of housing thousands, artificial gravity, closed-loop ecosystems, space farms to grow food, recycling systems to filter air and water, and manufacturing capabilities to produce tools, medicine, even shelter. Not a space station, a settlement. These aren't speculative blueprints. They are patented, prototyped, and in some cases already under construction. What once seemed science fiction is fast becoming a blueprint for survival. Bezos is no stranger to logistics. Through Amazon, he mastered the art of distribution. Now he's applying that knowledge to the stars. Blue Origin's launch facilities are expanding. Residential structures near the launch pads suggest permanent occupancy, and most notably, recruitment has shifted, not toward explorers, but toward sustainers. Life support experts, orbital engineers, psychologists trained in long-duration isolation. The shift began in earnest after 2020. Insiders speak of the Exodus Protocol, a plan for rapid orbital deployment in the event of Earth-based catastrophe. Pre-selected passenger lists, emergency launch procedures, supplies already in orbit or pre-positioned for rapid ascent. The future, staged like a play, waiting for the curtain to rise. This isn't just Bezos's personal project. His network of partnerships with space agencies, other tech billionaires, and logistics firms suggests something larger, a collective understanding. A coordinated effort to prepare for life beyond our planet. Meanwhile, back on Earth, his investments tell the same story. Vast agricultural holdings, decentralized health systems, and alternative energy networks. If Earth becomes unstable, the elite won't just escape. They'll have the infrastructure to restart somewhere else. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect isn't technological. It's philosophical. Bezos once said, "We need to go to space to save Earth." But what if saving Earth is no longer the goal? What if space is no longer a dream of unity, but a fallback for the few? In this vision of the future, who decides who ascends and who remains? And what happens to the idea of humanity when survival becomes a privilege measured not in courage, but in capital? In the frozen vaults beneath layers of rock and ice, Bill Gates is quietly planting the future. Unlike bunkers or rockets, Gates's preparations don't aim to escape the Earth, but to reseed it. His vision is methodical, deeply rooted, and quietly sobering. If the world ends, we must be ready to start again. It begins with seeds. Beyond the well-known Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway, Gates has funded a network of private, undisclosed seed banks across continents. Each is geologically stable, temperature-controlled, and fortified to withstand centuries of decay and disaster. These vaults don't just store plants, they store civilization, millions of species, crops tailored for extreme climates, degraded soils, or controlled environments like underground facilities. Redundant systems ensure nothing is lost, even if the rest of the world burns. But Gates doesn't stop at preservation. He's invested heavily in synthetic biology, lab-grown meat, artificial photosynthesis, and programmable microbes that can produce nutrients without sunlight. The goal isn't just to feed survivors. It's to decouple survival from traditional agriculture entirely. His agricultural research stations resemble futuristic biospheres, capable of generating food, medicine, and breathable air in sealed environments. These aren't academic exercises. They're field-ready systems designed to operate during collapse. And then there's medicine. Gates has poured resources into decentralized vaccine production, portable hospitals, and emergency medical supply chains that could function without global infrastructure. In a world where pharmaceutical networks fracture, his systems are built to endure. Some call it philanthropy, others call it foresight. Internal documents outline full-scale plans for post-collapse restoration, from crop distribution to infrastructure rebuilding. There are contingency outlines for deploying trained personnel, rebooting supply chains, even re-educating populations in the basics of survival agriculture. Yet it's not all open source. The seed banks are private, the technology's patented. And while Gates funds global initiatives, he also secures private rights to land, water, and data, resources that become lifelines in catastrophe. What emerges is a paradox. The man most associated with global health and digital equity is also the one preparing, quietly and comprehensively, for civilization's failure. His strategy isn't to escape the Earth, it's to reboot it. But reboot for whom? When survival becomes a system, who owns the password? And in a future rebuilt from vaults and formulas, will we recognize the soil we once called home? Somewhere in the Pacific, a quiet island hums with unseen power. Lani, once a sleepy corner of Hawaii, is now almost entirely owned by one man, Larry Ellison. The Oracle founder purchased 98% of the island, not just for beauty or luxury, but for something far more calculated. Over the past decade, Lanai has transformed into what some insiders call a civilization module. To tourists, it appears eco-friendly, a model of sustainable development. But beneath the surface, it's something else entirely, a self-sufficient, fortified survival colony. Ellison has poured over $600 million into infrastructure that goes far beyond resort needs. Desalination plants supply endless clean water. Solar and wind farms generate enough electricity for a city. Agricultural operations sprawl across the land: livestock, aquaculture, vertical farming. Food production isn't just sustainable, it's scalable, enough to feed thousands. What's being built is not a resort. It's a refuge. Defense is equally robust. Armed security patrols the island. Surveillance systems track every approach by land, sea, or air. Radar systems, restricted airspace, even patrol boats suggest preparation not for privacy, but for protection. Some call it paranoid, others call it prudent. Most intriguing are the underground constructions, masked as environmental protection projects that conveniently restrict external inspection. Local workers report miles of tunnels, bunkers connected by concealed passages, and vast storage vaults filled with medical supplies, fuel, and communication gear. In essence, Ellison has designed a complete backup civilization, one that can operate, heal, feed, and defend itself, entirely isolated from the outside world. Even the population appears curated. Over recent years, specialists have quietly relocated to Lanai. Doctors, engineers, logistics experts, and agricultural scientists. Not employees, residents, people chosen not just to work, but to preserve. Ellison's motivations, like many in this circle, remain officially vague. He speaks of wellness, sustainability, technological utopias. But the architecture of his island tells another story, that of a man building permanence amid impermanence. Unlike Musk, he's not leaving Earth. Unlike Thiel, he's not hiding. Instead, Ellison has turned a piece of the world into a resilient microstate, one that could survive without nations, borders, or even civilization itself. Which raises a deeper question. When the tools of empire fall into private hands, who becomes the governor of what remains? And when the lights go out on the mainland, will Lanai stand as a beacon or a walled garden? Not all survival is planted in the ground or launched into orbit. Some of it moves quietly across borders and oceans, invisible until it's needed. Reid Hoffman, co-founder of LinkedIn, has taken a different path from his tech peers. Rather than one fortress, he's built many. A global network of bunkers, discrete, distributed, and deeply interconnected. The idea is mobility, flexibility, redundancy. A decentralized system for survival, capable of adapting to any unfolding catastrophe. Earthquakes, pandemics, civil unrest, economic collapse. Different threats require different safe zones. Hoffman's answer is all of them. Each facility, scattered across continents, is equipped with independent power, advanced life support, secure communication, and long-term supplies. Some are tucked into mountain ranges, others beneath urban facades. The locations are classified. The access, invitation only. What makes this network unique is its coordination. The bunkers are not isolated capsules. They're nodes in a system. Satellite-linked, standardized layouts, compatible protocols. A single team can land anywhere and immediately operate the infrastructure. Survival as software. But this isn't just about safety. It's about continuity. Reports suggest Hoffman's facilities are built not just for personal survival, but to preserve operations, business, data, knowledge. A kind of parallel infrastructure, where key personnel from his ventures can continue working through the collapse. These aren't just hideouts, they're continuity chambers for the digital age. Even more revealing are his investments: decentralized platforms, encrypted communication, AI tools designed to function autonomously. The technology reflects the architecture, resilient, portable, and post-institutional. Hoffman's vision isn't loud. It's surgical. Quiet routes, pre-positioned aircraft, armored vehicles in waiting. If a region fails, the network reroutes, like a data packet avoiding a broken server. His coordination with other tech elites suggests something broader, a mutual defense pact for the digital aristocracy. Shared bunkers, linked comms, emergency transport corridors, a web of survival stretching across the globe. At its heart is a chilling efficiency. Civilization distilled into nodes and flows, people and power measured by utility mobility, and signal strength. But beneath the logic lies a deeper unease. What happens when the best-funded survival strategy isn't to fix the world, but to root around its failure? And in a world rebuilt by those who could afford to disappear, what values will return with them? Not all fortresses are made of concrete and steel. Some are made of code. Jack Dorsey, co-founder of Twitter and Square, has taken a path unlike any of his billionaire peers. His survival strategy doesn't rely on bunkers, bunkering islands, or off-world ambitions. Instead, it lives in the ether, a digital architecture designed to withstand the collapse of governments, banks, and infrastructure itself. Dorsey's obsession is decentralization. Cryptocurrencies, blockchain, open-source platforms, these aren't business ventures to him. They are lifelines. In his vision, when the old systems fail, something else must remain. A network that cannot be silenced, a currency that cannot be frozen, and communication that cannot be erased. Bitcoin is at the center of this philosophy, not just as an investment, but as a post-collapse monetary system, stateless, permissionless, and immune to central failure. Dorsey has invested heavily in mining operations powered by renewable energy, payment platforms that require no banks, and decentralized exchanges that work without government oversight. In parallel, he's been building communication tools designed for blackouts, mesh networks that link devices without the internet, satellite relays for global connectivity, and encrypted apps that survive censorship and surveillance. Together, these tools form what some insiders call the digital ark. It's not about hiding, it's about resisting, not just surviving collapse, but defying control. In a world where authoritarianism rises and centralized power tightens, Dorsey's vision is one of radical autonomy. His decentralized platforms don't rely on any single server. His economic tools don't answer to any state. His communication networks route around censorship like water around a stone. But resistance has its costs. There's an edge to Dorsey's preparations, a quiet expectation that digital freedom will come under siege. His development teams are trained for more than coding. Some are versed in operational security, disaster response, and post-collapse data preservation. They're not just building tools, they're preparing to use them under fire. In this, Dorsey's vision is less about personal escape and more about ideological survival. A future where the last remaining freedom may be encrypted, peer-to-peer, and untraceable. But even as he empowers individuals, he also fragments the collective. In a fractured world, decentralized systems may protect liberty or erode unity. So the question lingers. In saving the network, do we risk losing the nation? And when the digital becomes our final refuge, what becomes of the physical, of place, of people, of shared truth? On the island of Hawaii, something strange is happening. A new nation is quietly being born. Not through revolution, not through war, but through real estate, infrastructure, and influence. At the center of it is Mark Benioff, CEO of Salesforce, who has methodically acquired massive properties across the Pacific. Unlike others building bunkers or space stations, Benioff seems to be constructing something subtler, a sovereign zone, a place that can stand alone if the world falls apart. Locals have noticed the pattern. Media outlets bought, schools funded, hospitals built, water systems overhauled, and energy grids revamped. It's a full-spectrum investment, touching every element of daily life: food, news, health, education, governance. But behind the generosity lies preparation. Energy independence has been a cornerstone. Solar farms, wind turbines, backup systems buried underground. Communication lines run independently of mainland networks. Water is collected, filtered, and stored for long-term use. Agriculture is optimized for local self-reliance. This isn't just sustainability, it's sovereignty. Benioff's investments are creating what amounts to a self-governing territory. Not in name, perhaps, but in function. The systems that support life can run without state or federal input. The people he supports, doctors, teachers, engineers, are loyal not to a flag, but to a vision. A private vision of order. Insiders say there are plans for continuity governance, protocols that would allow the island to operate as an independent entity in the event of national breakdown. Emergency councils, defense arrangements, economic frameworks tied to crypto and local trade, not global banks. And while no laws have been broken, the consolidation is profound. When one man controls the water, the food, the media, and the medicine, does it matter what the flag says? It's easy to view this as stewardship. And in many ways it is. Benioff has improved lives, invested in resilience, and championed sustainability. But in doing so, he has also blurred the lines between leadership and ownership. And it raises a deeper, more haunting idea, that in the face of global instability, new forms of governance may not rise from the people, but from the billionaires who quietly prepared to rule what remains. If the old systems fail and the new ones wear a human smile but private origin, will we even notice the shift? Or will the future arrive not with force, but with infrastructure? From Cupertino to undisclosed locations around the world, a different kind of defense is taking shape, not in response to profit margins, but to potential collapse. Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, is building a perimeter, not just around his company, but around its survival. Unlike the visible compounds of other billionaires, Cook's strategy is buried in supply chains, personnel protocols, and private security networks that resemble a standing army. And that's not metaphor. Apple's security force, according to insiders, includes former special operations soldiers, intelligence veterans, and logistics experts trained in combat scenarios. These aren't guards for boardrooms. They're professionals rehearsing cyber-physical sieges, evacuation drills, and coordinated defense of critical infrastructure. The rationale? Continuity. Apple, as one of the world's most valuable companies, is more than a business. It's a keystone of the global economy. A failure of its operations would ripple across markets and nations. Cook appears to understand this, and to be preparing accordingly. Manufacturing hubs have been quietly hardened, data centers fortified, alternate suppliers established on multiple continents. Each major Apple facility can now operate for extended periods off-grid with independent energy, water, and communication systems. It's corporate resilience on a national scale. Apple's internal documents reportedly include continuity plans, not unlike those of governments, relocation protocols for executives, emergency communication lines with defense agencies, and detailed scenarios for operating during mass civil unrest or technological failure. But perhaps most telling is how quietly it's been done. While Musk boasts of rockets and Zuckerberg builds bunkers, Cook operates through silence and systems. He doesn't need an island. He's turned Apple itself into a fortified digital nation. And it extends to the individual. Secure communications, privacy-focused hardware, encrypted ecosystems. Apple's brand of safety doubles as infrastructure for digital independence. Tools that, in the right hands, become shields against chaos. But what happens when corporate preservation becomes indistinguishable from elite survival? When the lines blur between security and sovereignty? Cook doesn't claim to save the world. He claims to secure his corner of it. And in a time of looming instability, that might be enough. Still, it leaves us with an unsettling question. If the next form of governance isn't a flag or a constitution, but an operating system, who writes the code for tomorrow's peace? And who gets the update when the world goes offline? At first glance, it looks like a home. A cabin tucked into the woods, a modern structure nestled in quiet fields, a modest building on the outskirts of a coastal town. But these aren't homes, they're signals. A pattern is emerging among the world's most powerful technologists, and it's not just about hiding or surviving, it's about preserving continuity on their own terms. The final nodes in this network belong to those who saw the early warnings and built in silence, without spectacle or scrutiny. Some of them are lesser-known venture capitalists, early engineers, data architects, people with enough insight and capital to act, but without public profiles to protect. Their preparations are more discreet, but no less revealing. They've invested in multimodal transport routes, solar-powered communications hubs, and low-signature living facilities that blend into the landscape. Their bunkers don't rise. They disappear. Their airstrips are embedded in farmland. Their medical clinics are disguised as rural retreats. Many of them operate in overlapping circles. Shared protocols, common suppliers, whisper networks of survival expertise passed between private telegram channels and encrypted documents. A new kind of guild, not of knowledge, but of preparedness. What unites them isn't ideology, but information. Access to simulations, trend lines, classified briefings, and predictive analytics. They saw the same signals: economic fragility, ecological strain, social polarization, misinformation's viral velocity. And they drew the same conclusion: the old systems may not hold. But their reaction wasn't to warn the world. It was to build apart from it. This scattered constellation of safe houses and fortified compounds creates a shadow map of the future, one where survival is modular, mobile, and deeply private. Most haunting, though, is the mindset behind it. These individuals aren't building to fight. They're building to wait, to endure, to inherit. In their eyes, the collapse of centralized systems isn't a tragedy. It's a transformation, a shedding of obsolete frameworks, an opportunity to reboot more selectively, more efficiently. But where does that leave everyone else? What happens to the billions not invited to the ark, not trained for the fallback, not written into the restoration plan? When resilience becomes a private enterprise, survival stops being a shared project. It becomes a password-protected system. And in that future, seamless, silent, secured, will there be any room left for the chaos, the struggle, the humanity that once defined us? Or will the world be rebuilt in the image of those who prepared not to save it, but to replace it? Zoom out from the bunkers. Rise above the rocket silos, the encrypted servers, the fortified islands. What you begin to see is not isolation, but coordination. These billionaires aren't simply retreating from the world. They're organizing something parallel to it. A mirrored civilization, fragmented, fortified, and fully self-directed. Whispers of shared protocols circulate between survival networks, defense agreements, emergency logistics routes, even informal treaties about orbital resource claims. They're not just preparing for collapse, they're planning for what comes after. It's the architecture of a soft succession. Their compounds are more than shelters. They're seedbeds for new rules, new hierarchies, new cultures. One where governance is algorithmic, money is decentralized, and participation is invitation only. A world rebuilt not by nations, but by networks, closed, calculated, and curated. Even their technologies reflect this philosophy. Decentralized finance, artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, synthetic food, quantum-secure communication. Each removes dependency on traditional systems. Each removes friction. And each, in isolation, is a marvel. But together, they form the foundation of a civilization that no longer requires us. What began as personal precaution has quietly matured into collective divergence. And perhaps the most chilling detail isn't what's being built, but what's being left behind. There are no public institutions in these plans, no contingency for civic education, no room for democratic negotiation, dissent, or mess. These blueprints presume collapse and replace community with curation. The new world, as imagined by its wealthiest architects, is efficient, modular, and insulated. A place where catastrophe isn't just survived, but leveraged, where those with foresight inherit not just safety, but sovereignty. This raises a final, uneasy question. When collapse becomes the plan, who benefits from its arrival? And if the richest among us are no longer investing in the systems that serve us all, but in systems that serve only themselves, have they already left us behind? In the end, perhaps it's not the bunkers we should fear most, but the quiet certainty of those building them that they'll never need to come back. In the quiet after the storm, what remains? Not the bunkers, not the rockets, not the encrypted networks humming beneath mountains or the seed vaults hidden beneath ice. What remains is a question, a haunting echo of everything we've just seen. What does it mean when those with the most power to shape the world prepare instead to abandon it? This isn't a story of villains, nor is it one of salvation. It's a story of divergence, of a widening gap between those who believe they can fix the future and those who believe they must survive it alone. The billionaires profiled here didn't act on impulse. They acted on information, patterns only visible from the highest towers of wealth and data. And their conclusion was clear: the system is too fragile, too volatile, too exposed. So they built their exits. But in doing so, they revealed something deeper, not just about the world, but about us. About how trust has eroded, how institutions have frayed, how community has withered under the weight of complexity, speed, and disconnection. Their preparations are not just acts of foresight, they are acts of loss of faith in democracy, in cooperation, in the idea that humanity, at scale, can endure the challenges it faces. And yet, we are still here, still capable of imagining a different outcome. One not built on escape, but on restoration. Not in isolation, but in repair. Where resilience is shared, not sold. Where safety is not a privilege, but a project. Where the future belongs not to the most prepared, but to the most connected. These stories ask us to look inward as much as outward. They ask, what are we building together? They ask, who do we trust when the lights go out? They ask, is survival the end or the beginning of something better? In the end, the bunkers may hold, the rockets may launch, the encrypted networks may endure, but the future, the true human future, will depend not on who hid best, but on who dared to stay, to listen, to rebuild, not after the collapse, but before it ever comes.